Lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality, to peace, peace, peace.
Hello viewers, I am Chitra Krishnamurthy, the Director of Rithyalaya, the School of Indian Classical Odissi Dance in Potomac, Maryland. Welcome to the Rithyalaya webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal. Her story and our stories. While COVID-19 has presented many challenges, we have proceeded with choreography and would like to share with you some glimpses of the upcoming show. In the fall, we will be presenting Her Story, a dance portraying a woman's battle to overcome darkness by rekindling her passion for dance. To shed more light on the topic of depression, we are conducting a series of webinars. We now present the first pre-production webinar. We have assembled an esteemed group of panelists. The panelists include speakers who have openly talked about the malady called depression that has challenged them. The panelists also include therapists, the healthcare professionals who will give us further insight into this darkness and the healing and the recovery process. We are calling these initial conversations Her Story webinars, as these same panelists will talk about their different paths to healing in the post-Her Story webinars. We will keep you updated and take this opportunity to invite you to view our presentation of Her Story. We hope you will join us at the online premiere. Recovery may not be the right word I'm looking for. I think I mean healing and the healing process. I'm convinced that the different kinds of help available these days and with modern technological innovations, we will conquer and move forward. I'm positively cheering for hope in the future. Let's start our conversation with the panelists. We will conduct the discussion as a question and answer session. We are honored to have such a diverse panel today. I would like to introduce the speakers and the healthcare professionals here with us. Our speakers are Ms. Semora T. John-Smith, Mr. Rohit Ray. Our healthcare professionals for today are Dr. Shanda Reynolds and Dr. Naheed Nasrat. Thank you for being here with us. I would like to start off this panel discussion with a few questions for our speakers. Ms. Smith, in the fall, we will be seeing and hearing about Her Story, our dance production. Today, we would like to hear from you about your story. Please share it with our viewers, addressing the following points. What were your experiences with depression? Did any specific event trigger this depression? Or was it just random? Ms. Smith, over to you.
I started experiencing depression as a young child. But back in the day when I grew up, children weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to express themselves. So oftentimes you would exclude yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I had this extreme aloofness about myself. I always hid away from people. And it started with the lack of having my father around. And when I was introduced to the man who I knew as my father, it was not a great introduction because he was supposed to do something that he had promised and never showed up. And that day was the worst day of my life, and it triggered depression and everything that followed. It gave me that fear of detachment. So everything I had, I felt like I had to hold on to it as close as I could, whether it be my siblings or, friends, and including objects such as my dolls. Over the years, I collected close to 100 dolls because I refused to give them away or was afraid to break them, because to me, that was a form of detachment. And anything that happened to my dolls would trigger this thing, this lack, this loss of something. And the other moments that triggered it was when my grandmother died. My grandmother was pretty much the father in my life because she provided for us and she was the protector that I knew of. She died one year and then my mom died the following year. So I didn't even get a year or two to grieve or to be comforted between the two deaths. And because of that, everything just started spiraling down. And 1989 was my first experience with a professional. I actually went to see a psychologist who helped me through the process. And without her help, I may not have made it through college because I was clearly in a deep, deep, deep depression. So much so, I was suicidal. I couldn't focus, withdrew from school. So much was going on. I started being self-destructive because I didn't feel that my life was worth anything. And then when my mom died, I felt like my dad would come, but he never did, even then. So I clearly felt like I was alone. I had no mom, I had no dad. How was I supposed to move on? So it really, really triggered like all this crazy stuff. I would do things that I knew were totally out of character, but I did them because it was almost like it was a moment of soothing and comfort for me. I never drank alcohol, so I would start testing little things, or the medications that I was put on. I would take more than what I was supposed to take, just to numb myself. So, it was really, really, really bad for me. And I couldn't tell anyone because one of the things I did to try to counter what was happening to me as a child, I used to think that it was my fault, the reason why my daddy didn't want me. So I would do things. I became like this overachiever because I felt like the more I did right, the more I became the perfect little girl, then my daddy would come to me. So I became very compulsive about things. Everything had to be in order. So much so even now, I have this composure. Even in my home, everything has to be placed just in order because I felt like if I was in order, if I had structure, if I was this perfect little girl, then my daddy would come back. So it's funny how all this stuff was internalized for 40 years. It took 40 years for me to actually release and acknowledge that I had a problem. And that was only when I collapsed in DC and ended up in the hospital. At that point, it was at the extreme and I had no other choice but to acknowledge what was happening around me. But not only that, to acknowledge how it was impacting my children.
Thank you. That was so moving. I will repeat the same questions to our second speaker. Mr. Ray, what is your story? Please share it with our viewers. Again, addressing the following points. What were your experiences with depression? Did any specific event trigger depression or was it random? Mr. Ray, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Krishnamurthy. Depression for me was a foreign topic as a young kid. And growing up, I probably had symptoms of anxiety and depression from a very young age that I had failed to recognize due to a lack of obtaining appropriate resources and due to my family's lack of outreach. I would fail to seek and recognize what was really going on with myself, and my family had always told me to shrug it off. My father comes from a biological background, and my mother comes from a nurturing background in childcare. So it's very difficult for me to go ahead and accept the fact that these two individuals who have been in the public health space for quite some time were not able to recognize what mental health was. Going into college, I went into a severe depression mode because prior to that, I was excelling in my academics fairly well. And within our South Asian communities, academics are put onto a very high pedestal and of great value and importance. When I started to go ahead and not perform as well, instead of having such a response of positive affirmation that it will be okay, failure is a part of your life, it's a part of the pillar of success, my parents rebutted me with comments such as, you're not going to amount to anything in life. You're going to become a garbage collector for the rest of your life if you don't go ahead and excel in your academics. And these negative repercussions, these negative comments ultimately led me to think that I was incompetent of myself. Going into college after letting go of my dreams of pursuing music, of which I had burned my acceptance letters, fearing of what my father would go ahead and tell me, I became lost and I had nowhere mentally to go. Through my friend's support, I realized that I had developed prone academic anxiety and depression. I started to have suicidal thoughts, and even one moment I had tried to take my own life. And my parents at that point, even though seeing me at the hospital in this kind of situation, they were the people who were my support bubble my entire life, had suddenly seemed to vanish and not understand. So through the many, many years, I had dropped out of my college. I had taken time to self-reflect and focus on myself, going into different therapeutic methods, such as spiritual meditation and religion as well, for a little bit of an extent. And I seemed to really grasp upon myself what was important from my life, which was a necessary balance, and to receive more of mental peace rather than striving to what everybody else is doing around me. So I'd seemed to focus more on myself rather than the expectations of my community and my family beside me. And through that, I decided to go ahead and pursue my own podcast to help others in a way that I couldn't help myself in the past, which was to have a platform to express and to speak out whenever people are going through mental health related issues, and to alleviate the stigmas and taboos surrounded in our community.
Thank you to both of you, Ms. Smith and Mr. Ray. Your stories are inspiring and so real. I will now turn to the healthcare professionals to get insight on the speakers' experiences. Dr. Reynolds, what have your experiences been with depression in the community? Dr. Reynolds, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Just listening to the speakers just talk about their personal experiences, I think the common theme that I'm hearing here is at one point they felt as though others couldn't relate. They were feeling alone. And so with that in mind, I think that just speaks to how communities of color in general, how there is such a stigma attached to mental health and wellness. And a lot of people just don't feel comfortable opening up. They don't feel comfortable disclosing some of the things that they experience. However, it is important for us to keep in mind that mental wellness challenges and the things that we might experience internally is completely normal. We have to normalize these conversations. However, one of the reasons or several reasons why many people may feel as though, especially in our community and communities of color, they might feel as though they can't go to other people and talk about these things is that fear of stigma attached to mental wellness, the fear of judgment, fearing that they'll be shunned by their community members, because for so often, for centuries, Black and individual communities of color often feel as though we have to constantly be strong. We have to persevere in the midst of the storm. We have to, and ultimately that's suffering in silence. And that I feel as though that has done our community injustice for many, many years. And so when thinking about this, it's important to keep in mind that millions, over 4 million Black and communities of color experience mental wellness challenges in the world, like over 4 million. That's a lot of people. And if we would continue to keep this in our perspective and keep this in mind, then we'll be able to really acknowledge that, okay, maybe I'm not the only one suffering. Maybe I'm not the only one experiencing depression or anxiety or feeling lonely, feeling depressed, feeling isolated. There are other people within my community who might be feeling like this, but ultimately it's going to be important for us to really continue to have conversations like this so that other people can feel comfortable coming out and talking about it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nasrat, what have your experiences been with depression in the community? over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here today and share the space with you. I want to thank the two presenters that are telling us their stories. It takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes a lot of work. And so I congratulate them for doing that. And this is really inspirational. Let me tell you that depression is a common phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. It's a normal human experience, right? So I have never met anyone in my life who has not felt depressed in their life, right? But there are obviously differences in terms of the level of its severity, frequency, and intensity. So therefore, we have to have a conversation about that depression is a normal existential human experience, right? Without that we would not actually know what happiness actually look like. Right. So having said that, my perspective, and I really, as Dr. Reynolds mentioned, I see there is a theme also with our two courageous presenters who told us their story. One is that the issue of not being able to be seen, right? The invisibility. Ms. Smith mentioned the fact that, she was expecting something and the father did not show up. So she was feeling very sad about that. The attachment part that we're all longing for, right? We are social creatures. We want people to acknowledge us, to belong, to tell us that we belong in our community, family, society, globally, whatever you call it. As well as Mr. Ray, who basically, I'm assuming, and please forgive me if I'm wrong, who might be a second generation immigrant child, right? And that is a whole different layer of expectation that comes within that. Parents come here, make sacrifices to make sure that their children are okay, successful, and move on with their life. However, unfortunately, and not to their fault, they actually don't understand the acculturation processes that it goes into this whole direction of not understanding what a child who basically grows up experiences on a daily basis. So who are they? Are they, American? Are they Indian? Are they Afghans? Are they African Americans? What is this identity like? And so when they go into their own schools and so on, they feel different. Right? And there's also the pressure of the community or the parents, you need to succeed, you need to be the best students and so on. So hence, there's a lot of stress that they are experiencing. And so my heart goes out to them and my own community where I interact with a lot of refugees and immigrants. My first talk with them is to please pay attention that you're here safe and sound. The rest, you need to also make sure that children remain healthy. So what being healthy means, right? So we talk a lot about depression. So in the immigrant community, depression is incredibly high. Unfortunately, there is not enough of, I think I would say, willingness to talk about it because it brings shame. It brings the notion of they're different, that they're bad, or that they're being seen as weak, as we all come from different spiritual, religious background, right? We know that is something that is, we're being told, get snap out of it. It's not something that you have to deal with or be strong. And I'm kind of tired of being, subscribing to the narrative of being strong. I think strong means that you have to go through so many losses. And without actually having the psychological resources to remain that way, right? So my very dear colleague, Dr. Reynolds, alluded to the fact that, the people of color, communities of color actually experience it differently in a much more intense way because there is all other aspects of racism, sexism, and you name it, things that have been really impacted these communities for a long, long time. So it's a long conversation, and I'm glad that, you have started these conversations. It really brightens my heart.
Thanks to both of you, the healthcare professionals, for your thoughts, your own experiences with it, and those of the speakers. Now, getting back to the speakers. Ms. Smith, did you face any stigma that deterred you from seeking help? If so, how has that affected you? People say, exactly like Dr. Nasrat said, snap out of it. Can you really snap out of it? How would you perceive this? Ms. Smith, over to you.
Yes, there was a lot of stigma. First of all, as Ms. Reynolds, Dr. Reynolds just pointed to, in the Black community, anytime you speak about anything relating to mental illness or depression or anxiety, the first word that comes out is, you're crazy, the judgment. And for me, growing up the way I did, I'm the youngest of 10. So I also had to experience through observation of my siblings, them feeling the same way I was feeling. So in my house, it almost became a norm. You know, I grew up listening to relatives refer to me as a bastard. If you can imagine as a kid, having your relatives refer to you as a bastard. So at the core of my depression was not feeling that I was ever worthy, not feeling that I was good enough. So yes, there was a stigma because I used things like the fine arts. I was a good dancer. I was a good singer. My mom couldn't afford to send me to any formal classes. So there are people within the community, professionals who reached out and connected with me and planted seeds in my life. And for that, I became what I am now in terms of my profession. But had it not been for that, I may have been really deeply drawn in, even at a young age. But they helped me to escape by teaching me dance, by teaching me chorus, taking me on camps with them. So that was my way to escape the norm that was happening in my house, in my community, and whereby they were saying I couldn't or making me feel like I wasn't good enough. Each time I accomplished a goal, it made me feel that I was good enough. So now I'm the competitor. Now I'm the academic. Now I'm the winner, the first up in my family for so many things. So of course I couldn't say I'm dealing with anxiety or depression. Not you. That's the first thing they would say. You know, especially when my mom died, they couldn't understand the fact that my life fell apart. I couldn't even tell them the fact that I was feeling suicidal. They were the last people. The family who I thought should have been the first were the last people I could tell. So of course there was a stigma because I was now the person most likely to succeed. I could not go to them and say I have a problem because now all the judgment would come.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, how did the stigma of depression impact you from reaching out to others and seeking help? How did you overcome the stigma? Mr. Ray, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnamurthy. There is a lot of stigma and taboos that revolved around my life as well. Growing up in a South Asian community, the conversations you first hear are never related towards how are you doing or what's going on with your life. It's morally towards how are you doing academically? What classes are you taking? What future do you plan to pursue in your life? And these questions were not the right questions to ask a certain individual whose anxiety was prone to going ahead and be revolving around these kinds of topics. It led me to attempt to normalize the darkness that was surrounding me, often and so many times, because these questions would consistently poke my conscience, thinking that I'm doing something wrong. Why is everybody else performing okay in their life and I'm not? But I failed to see that oftentimes in our communities, we talk about the positive aspects of everybody, even when it comes towards comparison of other families and other children, but not about the negative aspects that are talked about their life. We often fail to see what struggles people have to take in order to achieve a certain pillar of success in their life. The way that I overcame this was that literally, if it wasn't for me using my voice as my platform, which is one of the biggest slogans I use for my podcast right now, if I hadn't reached a certain family friend individual who gave me a very important of advice in my life, which is where it doesn't matter where it is, who it is, if it is a toxic relationship, cut it out. And when I was young, I took a very brave step to cut out a lot of people in my life, temporarily, even my own two parents, because of the fact that that toxicity was making me and compelling me to think in certain ways I had never thought of before. And I realized this was bad for my self-esteem as well as myself in the nearby future. So I was very, very similar as well when it came towards the fine arts. I sang in a lot of choirs. I did a lot of activities in high school that probably distracted me from what were the ongoing issues. Started using meditation to clear my mind and think about what helps me to resonate around myself and what I want to do around my life. So instead of focusing on what was not important for me, I started to focus on what is essential for me. And that's how I got over my stigmas and taboos.
Thanks to both the speakers who have been so forthright with their experiences with the stigma attached to depression. We will delve into this a bit more by asking the next two panelists about their experiences. This question is addressed to both Dr. Nasrat and Dr. Reynolds. When one has a broken bone, we let the injury heal with a cast, medicines, and physiotherapy. When one is ill with, let's say, the flu, we let the illness heal with medicines, fluids, and rest. However, when one suffers from depression, why is there such a stigma attached to it? What are some barriers, including stigma, that you encounter that inhibit people from seeking help? Let's start with Dr. Nasrat this time.
Thank you. This is such an important question in terms of what is stigma. First of all, let me start by saying that stigma happens when someone is labeled in a way that hurts their standing in the community. Right? So that's about the existence, right? So do not talk about it, otherwise people will shut us down. And that will bring shame to the entire family, especially when we come from a collectivistic kind of orientation. So your health is going to be affecting the entire family and then our standing in the community. So that's one, especially in the community of, this is really related to all ethnicities and races and so community, but more so in collectivistic societies where our individual act is really, really impacting the whole community. So secondly, there is also people who stigmatize themselves, right? And that is something is wrong with me, as Ms. Smith mentioned, Mr. Ray mentioned about the fact that there is, I'm not good enough or I am not enough. And so these are the messages that people, children, adults hear constantly because there is this almost elusive idea of what a good person should look like, right? But we don't really understand, or we want to stay away from differences. So stigma is viewed as something you're different. So difference brings anxiety in us. And so we don't know how to deal with people who are different from us. So therefore, we just either reject them or we say that we need to not talk about it, just ignore them. So in my own community, just let me mention that in the past, individuals who had suffered from or were suffering from depression, they were hiding, or they were basically hiding by parents, by communities in their homes, not to come out, so that would not bring shame to the community, to the family. So this is very, very strong component. So cultural, sociocultural component really play a huge role in terms of what is your image, what is your persona in the community. That's one. And the second one is also the social media, socio-political issues that really play a huge role in terms of what does it mean to be different. And difference is beautiful. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just that we come from different walks of life. As long as the person is able to express themselves in a way that is not hurtful to others, right? And so people really approach depression with tremendous stigma that needs to be addressed.
Next, Dr. Reynolds, for your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my colleague just said, I think she hit the points that I was going to hit on, but just to kind of go even further with regard to that, that piece of feeling like I'm broken, right? So if I have some sort of depressive symptom or anxiety symptom or some other mental health related diagnosis, that means that there's something wrong with me, therefore I'm broken. I think that's very common, especially in communities of color, as we previously alluded to. Like, we're always expected to be strong and to kind of just persevere when we're not okay. And when we do open up, when we're feeling not okay, then we have the fears of like, okay, what will my family say? What will my brother say? What will my cousin say? Because we do come from that collectivistic culture that my colleague was speaking about. And even thinking about that shame, right? The shame that is associated with mental health difficulties and mental wellness challenges. When we think about the emotion of shame, it's important to keep in mind that it's a very strong emotion. It's an emotion that often leads to just emotional anguish and feeling like you don't belong. It can lead to our body's stress responses. So you get headaches, and like all these different things can result as a feeling of shame, especially with the shame related to feeling like you're experiencing some sort of diagnosis that other people in your community may shun you for. They may not also be experiencing. And I want to also bring up the importance of discussing like those Eurocentric cultural gender norms that we have, because I think that plays a significant role in the stigma that is associated with mental wellness. So for women in our culture, it might be more acceptable for us to say I'm depressed or I'm sad or to cry. But for a male, it might be more difficult for them to come out because of the fact that they might be deemed as being weak or broken if they were to cry or to say that I'm sad. So I think it is going to take a lot of work on our end in order to dismantle some of those gender norms that do exist and that cause people to keep that stigma attached to mental wellness diagnoses.
Both your reflections from a healthcare point of view are extremely useful. Going back to the speakers now, we will discuss our specific journeys to healing after our dance production in the post-production webinar series. In HERstory, the dance production, the main character, Her, is portrayed as an ordinary woman who is coaxed by her family, dance mates, and therapists to use her passion for Odissi dance to overcome her depression and to launch her on her journey to healing. My questions to both Ms. Smith and Mr. Ray are, could you have started your journey to healing without help? Also, since we are in the midst of a pandemic with innumerable challenges, could you please tell our viewers if the COVID-19 disease or the lockdown impacted your depression or your healing in any way? Ms. Smith, over to you.
As far as my journey, I'm still focusing on what Dr. Reynolds spoke of in terms of the gender and the perceptions. It's even more so when you're a single parent. And so you're playing the roles of both. In my case, I'm mother and father of my house. So I've seen that growing up, even in my household as a child. So of course, it's really strong because if you're the table that everyone's being fed from, of course, you're not going to acknowledge that you're depressed. You're not going to speak out. You're not going to say anything because you have to uphold that image of being strong. You have to. And even that is damaging. So for me, I internalized everything. But when I saw that it was impacting my children, then I realized I did not want that depression to kind of trickle down into what's happening to my kids. That's when I awakened. And the thing that helped me the most was fine arts, my love for music, my love for dance. I'm a music director. But I drowned myself in that stuff too much to just cope. It wasn't enough to just cope. I needed to start healing. That's when I became a Toastmaster. Because one of the first things I knew, I needed to acknowledge what was going on with me. In my Toastmasters Club, because we have to do all these speeches, I literally created all my speeches around my problems subconsciously. And it helped me to release. And it also helped me to start helping others to release and heal. And then I realized, something's happening here for me. And then it made me open up to even want to receive help. So I surrounded myself with a network of people who cared for me, including psychologists, and talked about it, released. It was the greatest healing I could have ever had, just to be able to talk about it. And to have my children see me seeking help was even better, because I did not want everything to fall down to them, because I've seen that happen, a pattern in families that happen. So if I go on to answer the question in terms of COVID-19, with all the healing I've already started, it helped me even more so to be there to support others. Because this pandemic has been a depressing moment for many. I've lost 2 nieces in the pandemic. I've lost a mother-in-law in the pandemic, my children's grandmother, and I've lost friends very close to me during the pandemic. Because I started my healing process, it allowed me the resilience and strength that I needed to reach out and to help them. So this whole journey has been amazing for me. I'm still on the journey. The journey is not over. But what I'm seeing is that I'm becoming stronger, not because I held back from telling people my truth. I'm stronger now for owning up to my truth and acknowledging that I needed help, receiving the help. But as I receive the help and knowledge, I share it with others. So that's been the biggest value to my life right now, knowing that for me, the legacy for me is going to be, you know what? I opened up. And because I opened up, now I can comfort and embrace others.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ray, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that this pandemic has been an extremely hard time for everybody. There's been multiple losses that we have seen, multiple personal friends and family members of ours that have been sick. So uttermost blessings and happiness towards those who have suffered through the pandemic. Absolutely, I could not have started healing without seeking help from others. One of the biggest ways I sought out support for myself was to express my problems to trusted individuals who could help me find enlightenment when I had hit absolutely rock bottom through my negative, repetitive, bad behaviors. It takes just one person to reach out to you who suffers from depression or who understands to give you positivity within so much negativity. The isolation due to the pandemic had definitely made me receive a lot of repetitive episodes of anxiety and depression back and forth. However, it gave me time because of the lockdown to go ahead and self-analyze myself and reflect upon myself. What makes me me? What makes me happy? And what will make me feel like my life is worthy? With that, I started my journey of my mental health career by helping others relieve their mental health issues. And this indirectly helps me every single time that I do a collaboration like this, or I do a podcast, or I talk with somebody that has gone through a mental health issue themselves. It allows me to feel that, one, I am a normal human being for going what I've gone through, and two, I'm not alone. There are other individuals that think about the same kind of inputs and outputs that I have received in my life. And that helps me to this day, every single time.
Thank you for your frank comments. They're very touching. Let me now ask Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Nazrat questions along the same lines. This last set of questions is addressed to both of you. Please briefly touch on the fact that help is now available without specifying what could be tailored to each individual. Also, how has COVID-19 impacted depression in the community? We will start with Dr. Reynolds.
Yes, I love the fact that our speakers were able to reach out, get the help that they needed. And not only did they proceed in their healing journey, but they also reached back to help other people who might be going through those same experiences. I think that's so remarkable. But I just want to say to everybody who is viewing this panel discussion that getting help doesn't mean that something is wrong, but it is an indication that you are human. As human beings, we need help with tasks that we might do from day to day. We might need help with an assignment if you're in school or something at work. So getting help with our mental wellness doesn't mean that you're broken or inadequate. It simply indicates that you are a human being, and there is help out there. There are resources that you can connect with in order to receive that help. And it doesn't have anything to do with who you are as a person or what you can do or what you can't do. In addition to that, so going to the question regarding COVID-19 and how that has impacted the way that individuals have been presenting, especially in the practice that I work at. But overall, the statistics suggest that 49% of individuals in America endorse experiencing at least one symptom of anxiety or depression throughout the pandemic. And that's just a clear indication that we all have been experiencing something, whether that's increased worry, increased depression due to not being able to see our loved ones, losing frequently people and losing them through death and things of that nature, feeling worried about the pandemic and even going back out into the real world and having to go out and go out to these public events and things of that nature as the world continues to open up. It does elicit some sort of worry and anxiety. So all of these things can impact an individual, especially in COVID-19, and even thinking about substance abuse. So substance abuse has increasingly increased over the past year due to COVID-19. And that's just one of those things that's important for us to keep in mind, because so many people are suffering, but not a lot of people feel willing and open to come out and talk about it. But again, there are resources out there, and getting that help does not mean that there's something wrong with you.
Thank you. Dr. Nasrat, what are your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. First of all, let me acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 has impacted different communities differently. And those who had already a baseline of depression, anxiety, and other, emotionally related issues, they have suffered tremendously, doubly, if not triply. So the social isolation, which is also a part of some of the causes of depression, has even doubled, tripled. And so you can only imagine why there's so many people now feeling depressed. There's a lot of suicidal ideation, and because of the social isolation, all of that. At the same time, you need to take into account the biological component. One thing that I learned from this, and there are many other blessings that I have actually encountered that COVID could offer among all the other adversities that we had to go through, is one that I see depression differently. I was taught and have actually trained that depression has a biological component. That is, we have predisposition to become depressed and so on. But I've always fought against that, because there is this notion that society actually plays a major, much more role of causing depression, right? So what does that mean? That means that the stressors that we are experiencing as a result of COVID, social isolation, stigma, and everything else, that is really increasing, that these are increasing our stress level as well as our mood, and we become depressed. So it's not just biological component that we can give medication and then you're cured, right? So the issue is here how to go into the origin of the problem. Right? So how can we address the issue of depression when it comes to really what to do with it? Well, first of all, we need to realize that what are the social stressors that we are dealing with on a daily basis? A stress, a job, family, you name it. I mean, intersectionality of everything. And secondly, I think what it is that to having an understanding that, there's a help. First, at the individual level, I would like to invite everyone to really meet yourself where you are, right? So just because people say, well, be at that level and do this and you're going to feel better. No, it's not going to work out for everyone. So we need to meet them where they are, first of all. At the same time, if we need to cry. It's okay. A lot of communities and cultures, they don't allow us to be vulnerable and so on. And also, and I know that I'm running out of time, is that know that today isn't indicative of tomorrow, right? This shall pass too. This is very important. Depression really affects our thinking in a very negative way. We think that this is forever, that will never end, and so on. The brain is very, very plastic. And so therefore, we should really subscribe to the notion this shall pass too. And of course, reaching out to professionals and those who can help us in a culturally grounded way. Thank you.
Thank you, all healthcare professionals, for your poignant perceptions. It is so real. Listening to all four of you has made it evident that depression in itself is a huge challenge. On top of it, COVID-19 has impacted it in a rather harsh manner. I realize we have a lot of picking up to do. This has been a great food for thought session. From this discussion, it is quite evident that the experiences are different, the manifestations of depression are different, and so the roads to healing must also be different. After all, no two people are the same. However, the patterns are similar. Speakers, you are very courageous presenters to talk openly about your experiences with depression. This in itself is the first step, as depression is indeed very real and can affect anyone at any time, irrespective of race, gender, age, culture, ethnicity. It needs to be dealt with, and the stigma associated with it needs to be removed. Stigma only delays the recognition of depression and its horrific outcomes. A big thanks to the healthcare professionals who have provided tremendous insight into this darkness called depression. Folks, help is now available. Remedies are many, and the pathways to healing and recovery are plenty. After the production of HERstory, the same panelists will assemble and talk about their varied journeys to healing. However, they warn us that there are no miracles, and it is not an easy process with simple answers. Rome was not built in a day, and so too the mindset takes time. Please be patient with yourselves, is the message I'm getting from the panelists. Being an optimist, I foresee a future filled with stories such as HERstory, where Her shows us that pursuing her passion for dance helped her to heal. We now present a sneak preview of our dance production, HERstory.
Nrityalaya, the School of Indian Classical Odissi Dance in Potomac, Maryland, USA, presents HERstory. This multimedia conception will use the storytelling features of Indian classical Odissi dance, appropriate verbal explanations, and audiovisual effects to portray the story of a woman's struggle to overcome and heal her depression by rekindling her passion for dance.
I went through many challenging situations as a child and a teenager, including several rejections. As I grew into adulthood, I struggled with my inner demons.
snap out of it.
Just deal with it.
I asked, "Show me. How do I do that?" Seeking help made me realize that I could rekindle my passion for dance to heal. Coming soon in fall 2021. HERstory, a dance production that revolves around the story of my life. While dance is my passion, what passions can you pursue to heal?
Viewers, her story will be presented in the fall. Needless to say, we are very excited to have you join us as we explore her journey through depression and her healing process. Thanks for your patience. Thank you, panelists, for an animated discussion in this first episode of the Nrityalaya webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal, titled Her Story and Our Stories. This much needed discussion has left us with many points to consider and ponder over, as these are indeed important conversations. On this slide, you will find the names and emails of the healthcare professionals who participated in our panel today. They would like us to understand that no one is alone, so do not give up, as help is only a click away, as they say. Thank you, viewers, for joining us for this very pertinent discussion today.
Viewers, stay tuned for the next episode that will air on YouTube. It will include another diverse panel that will present their stories and different viewpoints. Please help us spread the word. We definitely welcome and encourage participation in our webinars. So if you're interested, please send an email to nrityalaya@hotmail.com with your name, telephone number, and email so we can contact you. Please put Nrityalaya webinar series in the subject line to alert us to your interest. The credit for the webinar series goes to the Nrityalaya webinar team. Please check our website at www.odissinrityalaya.com for updates. See you at the next webinar on July 10th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. This is Dr. Chitra Krishnamurthy signing off from the first episode of the HERstory webinar series, Pursuing Passions to Heal, titled Her Story and Our Stories. Thank you.